Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be here.
So, right out of the gate, we are diving into the raw data behind the steepest decline in religious belief in recorded history.
Yeah, the numbers are pretty wild.
They really are. I mean, for millennia, the concept of God was basically the load-bearing pillar of human civilization, right? But today, it is visibly crumbling across a huge chunk of the globe.
Absolutely.
We are witnessing this unprecedented explosion of atheism and really just a structural collapse of organized religion. So in this deep dive, our mission is to explore the exact mechanisms driving this mass exodus.
Right, the actual why behind it all.
Exactly. Like what actually happens to a society when it loses its collective need for God? And where is this massive spiritual shift taking humanity next?
It's a huge question.
It is. And just to be clear for everyone listening, we're dealing strictly with the sociological data today. We are looking completely objectively at the mechanics of how and why human belief is rewiring itself in real time. We're not taking sides, just looking at the source material.
Right, because, I mean, this is arguably the most significant sociological rewiring of the modern era. We're basically watching the foundational infrastructure of human identity fundamentally change its operating system.
Ooh, an operating system update. I love that analogy.
Yeah, it fits perfectly.
It really does. It's an OS update, but it's one that is basically deleting the oldest legacy code we have.
Oh.
And I want to get straight into the mechanics of how that code is being rewritten. Just really quickly, before we dive into the numbers, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. It really helps us keep doing these deep dives.
It definitely does.
So looking at the sources, the statistical reality of this post-religious world is just, I mean, it's staggering. We aren't just seeing like a slight dip in weekly church attendance here.
Oh, no, not at all. It's a complete inversion of the norm.
Right.
If you look at Western Europe, which, historically was the absolute undisputed stronghold of Christendom, the actual physical infrastructure of belief is being repurposed.
Like the buildings themselves.
Yeah. Exactly. You have these centuries-old churches being turned into libraries or skate parks and apartments.
Skate parks. That's just crazy to think about.
It is, but the data gets even more striking when you look at places outside of Europe, like Japan, the Czech Republic, Australia, New Zealand.
Yeah, the numbers there are wild.
In those nations, the statistical norm has completely flipped. Believers are now the minority.
The minority, wow. And then here in the United States, you have the rapid expansion of what the data calls the knowns.
Right, N-O-N-E-S.
Yeah, the demographic that actively checks no religious affiliation on census surveys. They're literally the fastest growing demographic in the country.
Which is a huge shift for the U.S.
A massive shift. It's like a cultural tectonic shift. The very ground of human identity is just shifting beneath our feet, which brings up, honestly, the most crucial question when you look at a shift this massive. Why now? I mean, humanity has had organized religion for thousands of years. We didn't just suddenly become smarter overnight or, randomly decide to abandon it all at once. Is this just a coincidence, or is there a specific engine driving the shift away from God?
Well, according to the sources, there are actually three powerful intersecting factors driving this right now. Three specific engines, as you put it.
Okay, let's break them down. What's the first one?
So the first factor is the democratization of information. But it's really vital to understand what that actually means in practice.
Right. It's not just, oh, people can read more books now.
Exactly. Historically, religious authority controlled all the information. The clergy were the ones who read the texts. The institutions ran the schools. They had a monopoly on truth.
Yeah, the sources highlight that.
So the democratization of information isn't just about access. It's about the collapse of the social cost of doubt.
Oh, I love how the research frames that. The social cost of doubt. Because historically, questioning the divine wasn't just like a fun intellectual exercise.
No, it was dangerous.
Right. It was a societal hazard. If you lived in, say, a 16th century village and you started openly questioning the theological origins of a sacred text, you weren't just engaging in a lively debate.
You were risking everything.
Literally everything. Your livelihood, your social standing, and potentially your actual life. The religious institution was the ultimate gatekeeper of acceptable thought.
Precisely. They held the monopoly on community inclusion, but then, the internet comes along and completely shatters that dynamic.
Just breaks it wide open.
Right. Today, a person experiencing religious doubt doesn't have to voice it to their local cleric. They don't have to risk alienating their family or their community.
Because they can just go online.
Exactly. They can go online completely anonymously and find a community of thousands of other people who are dissecting the exact same theological inconsistencies. They can research secular history, test theological claims, and compare traditions all on their own.
So the internet didn't necessarily invent religious doubt. It just provided this perfectly safe, consequence-free environment for that doubt to foster and grow.
That's exactly it.
That makes total sense. But the second factor the sources bring up is the one that really caught my attention because it deals with pure, on-the-ground material reality.
Ah, yes, the Social Security net.
Yes.
The data here is fascinating. It shows a remarkably strong inverse correlation. As a nation's social safety net increases, its religious adherence reliably decreases.
Okay, wait, let's unpack this. Isn't it a bit reductive to say people only believe in God because they don't have good health care? Are the sources suggesting profound spiritual faith is just a coping mechanism for a lack of a safety net?
That is such an important point to clarify, and it's a very natural pushback. But we have to be precise about what the data is actually measuring here.
Okay, so what is it measuring?
The sociological research isn't judging the theological truth of faith. It's not attempting to invalidate the profound, genuine spiritual experiences people have. It's strictly tracking institutional reliance.
Institutional reliance. Okay, explain that.
So, for the vast majority of human history, life was incredibly precarious. A single poor harvest, a sudden illness, violence, it all meant total ruin. In that environment of constant existential threat, religious institutions were the literal safety net.
Right, they were the ones running the hospitals and the orphanages.
Exactly. They organized the mutual aid, they offered comfort against poverty and disease, and they provided the psychological resilience to endure immense suffering.
So it's not that belief itself is just a shallow coping mechanism. It's that when a centralized secular government steps in, when state healthcare and welfare strengthen the societal need for God as a physical protector, naturally drops.
Precisely. When the state provides a baseline of material security, that immediate daily reliance on religious institutions for literal survival evaporates. You don't need the parish or the mosque to ensure you won't starve in your old age anymore.
Wow. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that actually sets up the third factor perfectly, which is urbanization and individualization.
Right, the shift away from rural life.
Yeah, because in a traditional rural setting, the religious institution is the absolute center of gravity. If you don't participate in the local church or mosque, you are effectively isolating yourself from your entire social network.
You're cutting yourself off from the local economy, the marriage pool, everything.
But modern, urban, highly mobile lifestyles completely change that map.
They really do. When you move to a massive city, you operate on anonymity and choice. You can build your entire identity, find your romantic partners, and form deep communal bonds completely outside of any religious framework.
You can just fulfill your social needs somewhere else. You find a different tribe.
Exactly. The religious monopoly on social gathering is broken.
So, okay, since the structural world has changed so dramatically with the internet, welfare states, and cities, how is this actually affecting human lifespans? Because a lot of people just assume this is a phase, right?
Oh, the old teenage rebellion theory.
Yeah, exactly. The trope
Yeah.
that teenagers go to college, rebel against their parents' faith, call themselves atheists for a bit, but then they get older, have kids, and go right back to the church.
Right. Well, the data strongly suggests that specific trope is fundamentally dead.
Dead.
Wow.
What we are witnessing is a very clear youth trend. Each new generation starts out significantly less religious than the last, and crucially, they stay that way.
So they aren't aging back into the church at all.
No, they aren't. Millennials were less religious than Gen X. Gen Z is less religious than millennials. And as they age, their rates of religious participation remain totally flat. It's a permanent structural shift.
That's a huge deal. And I really want to deconstruct the labels here because irreligious isn't just one thing, right? The sources are very clear that this expanding group of non-believers isn't a monolith.
Not at all. It's a very broad spectrum.
Right. So let's break down that spectrum from the sources. Obviously, on one end, you have atheists.
Right. Individuals who simply do not believe God exists. Full stop.
And then you have agnostics.
Who believe it is impossible to know whether God exists or not. They withhold judgment.
Okay, but then we get to this really fascinating group. The spiritual but not religious, or the SBNR demographic.
Yeah, this group is huge right now. These are people who explicitly reject organized religion. They want nothing to do with the dogma or the institutions.
But they aren't atheists?
No, They still seek profound meaning. They still have a deep psychological need for transcendence. They just pursue it outside the bounds of traditional faith.
And then on the flip side of that, you have the cultural believers.
Right. This is such an interesting paradox.
It really is. These are people who keep the religious label as an identity, like cultural Catholics or secular Jews, but they lack the actual belief.
Exactly. They'll celebrate the holidays and defend the cultural heritage, but they don't actually believe the supernatural or theological claims.
It's just wild how messy and human this all is. And for everyone listening right now, I want you to genuinely consider this. Where do you fall on this spectrum? Or, where do your friends fall? Because chances are, people in every single one of these categories.
Oh, no, most certainly.
So if all these people across this whole spectrum are leaving religion, what exactly are they walking into? Because reading the sources, this brings up a really valid critique.
The secular void.
Yes, the void. For centuries, religion provided community, meaning, and a shared script for rituals, weddings, funerals, processing grief. When that goes away, a huge void is left behind.
It's a massive vacuum, and secular societies are really trying to patch this void. They're using cultural events, NGOs, secular philosophy, and a heavy, heavy reliance on therapy.
Right, outsourcing spiritual care to licensed clinicians.
Exactly. But the sources are very intellectually honest here. They admit this transition is not easy. A weekly therapy session or a local NGO just cannot replicate the deep, multi-generational cohesion of a religious institution.
So it's leaving a lot of people feeling isolated.
Very much so. It's a very difficult transition.
Now, just as it seems like atheism and this secular void are taking over the entire globe, the sources introduce this massive plot twist.
The geographic exception.
Yes, because religion is actually strong and growing in specific parts of the world.
It is. In sub-Saharan Africa, parts of South America, and the Middle East, religious belief is incredibly vibrant. It's expanding.
Which completely shatters that popular narrative of inevitable secular progress. Like, atheism isn't just this automatic global destiny that everyone is marching toward.
They're not at all. Belief is highly dependent on local socioeconomic and political realities.
Right, tying back to the safety net. If you live somewhere with extreme political instability or a lack of basic public infrastructure, the secular state has failed you. So the religious institution is the only functioning safety net left.
Exactly. You turn to the church or the mosque because they're the ones actually providing mutual aid and stability.
Wow. Okay, so pulling all of this together, the internet, the safety nets, the generational exodus, the secular void, it brings us to the ultimate impartial so what question.
The big one.
Yeah. Does a world without religion mean a better world? And again, just reminding you, the listener, as your guides on this deep dive, we're completely neutral here. We're just reporting what the sociological findings say.
And the data is very nuanced on this. It explains that irreligion or atheism isn't some automatic fix for society.
Right. It doesn't cure human greed or automatically make a country virtuous.
No, it's not an inherent virtue. But the data does suggest a very specific trend. When dogma decreases, critical thinking rises.
And by dogma, we mean that blind submission to abstract authority.
Exactly. When a society replaces unquestioning submission with open inquiry and evidence-based reasoning, the metrics show that those societies tend to become more just, more egalitarian, and more peaceful.
So it's the critical thinking that drives the positive change, not just the absence of religion. That is fascinating, and it leaves us with this incredible historical irony from the sources that I want to leave the listener with.
Oh, the shift in institutional posture.
Yes. Historically, religious institutions were these massive proactive powers. They initiated the societal debates. They set the rules.
They were always on the offense.
Exactly. But today, according to the research, they are viewing the rapid rise of atheism and agnosticism as a massive threat. And because of that, they are retreating into a deeply defensive posture.
They're reacting to society instead of directing it.
Exactly. Which is just a stunning inversion of power. And it leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over. What does it mean for the future of faith when the most historically powerful institutions on earth are suddenly forced to play defense?